So I owe this to Rabbi Shai Held, the rabbi of Hadar, an incredible center of Jewish learning in New York, and the author of really the best two-volume collection of reflections on the Torah to come out in the last decade called The Heart of Torah. It's a wonderful set and absolutely worthy of being on your shelves. Though if it is, you'll know how often I'm just ripping off Shai Held. So maybe don't put it on your shelves and I'll keep it on mine. Found in his writing this really remarkable midrash and want to spend a little bit of time thinking about it together. We're going to, in a few moments, talk in some small groups. You actually are going to participate in this one, and we'll do a little bit of learning. Let's start, though, with the words from the Torah itself. This is after Joseph has reported his various dreams, the first dream in which the bundles of wheat representing his siblings bow down to him, the second dream after the sun and the moon and all the stars, now including his parents, bow down to him, and his brothers have had just about enough of all of that. And so they come together, and each man said to his brothers, Vayomru ish el achiv, here comes the dreamer. Now let's go and kill him and throw him in one of the pits and say to our father, a fierce beast has consumed him, and we will see what becomes of his dreams. Reuben heard and saved him from their hands. And he said, let us not take his life, don't spill his blood, but cast him into that pit in the wilderness. He did this in order to save them from their hands, and he would later return him to their father. Now what, except for the two typos that I now caught in this source sheet, sorry, what's odd here in the way that Reuben's actions are being described? Anybody catch anything odd or redundant or not quite clear in the presentation of Reuben's plan to save his brother? Trudy? So Reuben is the compromiser, right? Let's not kill him, let's just throw him in a pit. That's a compromise of sorts. I'm not sure Joseph is a fan of that compromise, but a compromise of sorts, okay? Yeah, please. Karen. Oh. So Reuben here should be able to be in control of the situation. He is the eldest, and yet he doesn't feel able to control the situation, okay? What, Gyla? Reuben is a little shifty here. He's not saying to his brothers, no, this is a bad thing to do. He's hatching an alternative plan with a private plan to go back and save his brother. Of course, remember, the plan doesn't work out, right? They throw them in the pit, and before he has got the chance to come back, he is picked up by slave traders and carried away. Okay, anything else? Helene, I thought I saw a hand. Sure, throwing him in a pit is still not a very nice thing to do. Can we agree on that? Right? There are snakes and scorpions and creepy crawlies. It's a pit. I mean, this is not like a sweet way to save his brother. Okay, so there's clearly a lot of problems with Reuben's plan. He doesn't confront his brothers. He doesn't utilize his power as the eldest. He doesn't reveal what his plan is to do. And still, at the end of the day, it involves Joseph being thrown into a pit, which is not a nice thing, and it doesn't work because Joseph is going to get sold off into slavery anyway. But there's a textual challenge, which I have to admit, having read this story 100 times, I never noticed. And that's why I bolded it out here for you. Reuven heard, and he saved him from their hands, the Torah says. And then Reuven has his plan, which doesn't save Joseph. Right? The Torah says that Reuven saves him, but he doesn't. So there's something odd here in the description of Reuven's intention. He wanted to be the hero. Yeah, Rabbi? He does save him in the long run. In the short run, maybe not so much. We can agree, though, there's something a little finicky strange about the description here, and it becomes a jumping off point for Midrash. Anytime that the language of the Torah is a little bit unclear, that's a jumping off point for the rabbis to get involved. And this Midrash, this rabbinic commentary, comes from Ruth Rabbah, from actually a longer commentary on the book of Ruth, but you know rabbis like to go on tangents, so in the middle of Ruth Rabbah, they're talking about Genesis. Nothing ever changes. Rabbi Yitzhak ben Marian says, if a person performs a mitzvah, they should do it wholeheartedly. As had Reuven known that the Holy One was writing in his regard, Reuben heard and he rescued him from their hands, he would have taken him to his father on his shoulders. It's an interesting midrash, right? If Reuven knew what the Torah said, which was that he would be the one to save his brother, if he had acted wholeheartedly as opposed to with what Rabbi Held calls a half measure, let's not kill him, let's just throw him in the pit, there would have been an entirely different outcome to this story. And so I want to invite us to think for a few minutes about compromise, about half measure. Typically, we think of compromise, incremental change, not doing too much at once, trying to make everybody happy as a positive value. You've heard that sermon before, right? That Judaism is a tradition, in fact, of debates and discussions in which we come to, quite often, compromise solutions. That's a good thing. Except sometimes. Sometimes what's called for is wholehearted, bold action. Sometimes what's called for is not, well, you want to kill him, I don't think we should, so let's just throw him in a pit. How about that? Right? Sometimes what the moment calls for is it calls for moral clarity and a deeper form of strength. So I want to invite us in a moment. We're going to stand up because these fixed seats make it hard for people to get together in groups. And we're going to go over to a few other people. And I want to invite you in your small group to either think of a time in which you or someone else took bold action rather than compromise, and that made all the difference. Or if you're feeling brave and vulnerable, sometime when in retrospect, the compromise that you made would have actually been a better moment to have been wholehearted. So this can be a story of success, a story in which bold action made all the difference. This can be a story of learning, a moment in which compromise wasn't the right path to go. I invite you to think about those times when you tapped into your boldness, or when you might have, should have, ought to have tapped into your boldness, and share those with a few other people. We'll take 5 or so minutes in small groups. So why don't you stand up, and particularly if you see somebody you don't know, this is a great opportunity to get to know. Let's take 5 minutes of conversation. So I'd like to hear from a few people. I'd like to hear a story of bold, decisive action, sometime when compromise just wouldn't have cut it. Is there somebody who'd be willing to share with us a story? Nancy, please.
Thank you. Some people here don't know me. I'm an oncology nurse specialist and practiced for many, many years. And I was 28 years old right out of my master's program at UCLA, and I was recruited to open and run a new oncology unit. And this was a long time ago, and some things were very different. The patients were immunocompromised and very ill. And so I was getting to know all the physicians were new to me also. So I went with a surgeon who was always called to put in a catheter via which chemotherapy could be given more safely than in veins. And I went into the room with him and opened up the package for him, all of the equipment he needed. And he went right for the needle and didn't use any betadine, which would clean the skin. And I observed that. I wasn't able to stop him. I couldn't do that at the time. So I went to my boss, and the director of nursing, and she said, okay, Nancy, you go back to your office, you're going to write a policy and procedure, and we're going to pass it through the committee quickly, and there is no compromise here. So that was a bold action on the part of a 28-year-old confronting a surgeon who was very well known and practiced.
Beautiful. Thank you, Nancy. I'm sure you saved lives in doing that. Another story of boldness. Chuck, I can't imagine you being bold.
Right, I agree, yes. Anybody heard the story of the Abilene paradox? The Abilene paradox. About 20, 30 years ago, there was a management consultant who was also a stand-up comedian. So if you Google Abilene paradox, you can see him talking. He told a story. He was visiting family in, I think, Texas, and somebody said, "Let's go to dinner tonight in Abilene." Apparently, nobody really wanted to, but nobody said anything. So they all got in their cars, drove to Abilene. And they drove for an hour, and it was a miserable drive. And they get there, and the meal wasn't what they remembered, and they had a terrible time, came back, and they were all angry. And had one person said, "I don't want to go to Abilene," nobody would have, and it would have been a wonderful time. But nobody wanted to say, "I don't want to go to Abilene." That's the Abilene paradox.
As somebody who makes a cross-country drive to see my in-laws in Louisiana on an annual basis, I have been to several dinners in Abilene, and I can attest, nothing delicious in Abilene, Texas. One more story of either boldness or, if you're feeling brave and vulnerable, a moment in which boldness was called for. Anybody? Diane, thank you.
This is a situation that I am not very proud of. And it's just kind of a commonplace. I was in the CVS, and I was waiting to get a vaccine, actually last week, and I saw a woman who was in a walker who was waiting, and she was futzing, and she was upset, and she was talking out loud how late the pharmacists were, and I know that they were working their tushies off. And I could see, oh my God, I feel so badly that they're so overworked. And she, as I'm sitting there, she gets on her phone and calls the pharmacy as she's sitting over here. And she says, "I've been waiting here forever." It was about 3 minutes. Nobody's getting me. When I saw the pharmacist, they were coming out. And so in my head, I'm like, oh my God, please have some patience for these folks. Anyway, they eventually come. She gets her vaccine, and as she's coming out, she was in a walker, and she was struggling with her jacket to put it on. And they had called me, and I was walking by, and in my head, I was saying, I've got to tell her to be patient with them. And all I could do is I reached over and helped her as she struggled with her jacket on, and I didn't say anything. And she turned to me and said, "Oh, thank you so much." And I still didn't say anything. And I felt so badly that I could have said, pass it forward or something like that. So that was my story.
This is what counts as a Diane Gale story of not being proud of herself. I helped a woman in a walker, and I didn't tell her to be kinder. Slach lanu, chaper lanu, machal lanu. Oi. But we have all had that moment, right? When we have the opportunity to say something and we find that the words that ought to have come to our lips don't. I'm not sure that you need to give yourself a hard time about this moment, but I can think of the time and the time and the time when I should have opened my mouth and I didn't. Or I should have shut my mouth and I didn't. This is a season for thinking about boldness, for thinking about courage. That's the Hanukkah story, isn't it? Not a story of half measures, a story of all in. And that all in made the miracle possible. I like to talk about, and I did last week at the Nixon Library, if you were there, forgive me for mentioning this again, that I find that the first candle of Hanukkah is the most powerful. Because there's a clear miracle the other 7 nights. That a little bit, 1 day's worth of oil lasted for 2 days is a miracle. For 3 days is a miracle. For 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, really a miracle. But there's no clear miracle on night 1. 1 day of oil lasted for 1 day. Right? On the first night. It is what you'd expect. There is no clear miracle there. There's instead a deeper miracle. The deeper miracle is walking into the ruined temple, is finding 1 day worth of oil, of knowing that it won't possibly last, and lighting it anyway. Not waiting, not considering, not thinking, well, I guess we'll just put it off a week until we can make some more. But seeing an opportunity to light and taking that opportunity. And in that, opening the door to the miraculous. There's a lot of times, and God knows I need to learn, there's a lot of times when incremental change is good. There's a lot of times when compromise and making everybody happy is good. There's a lot of times to sit back and try to take into account all possible perspectives. And then there are also those moments that call on us to have holy chutzpah, those moments that call on us to be bold and brave, to light the lights even if we're not entirely sure what will be the outcome, to try even when we don't think that we have everything that we need, to take a big step, a bold step into the unknown and invite the possibility of miraculous transformation. Shabbat Shalom and Happy Hanukkah.